Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting started and we see the participants adding up here. We have quite a turnout today. So I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to get situated and we're going to get started in just about 1 or 2 minutes. So if you just be patient, I appreciate it. And seeing the participants coming into the program now. So welcome to our webinar. We're happy to have such a great turnout. We have a really good program today, so we're looking forward to it. If you just give me 1 minute, we're just having people coming in, and it's really great turnout. So we're excited about this. So I guess that's good. We're as people are coming in, you'll quickly get situated where we're at. We have a terrific program today talking about the challenges and pitfalls of transitioning into or actually out of the compliance officer role. And one of the things here at BarkerGilmore, we do a lot of chief compliance officer placement. Almost all of them do require a JD. So at some point in their career, people transition from legal to compliance. And with the demand out there, I will say the compensation packages that we're putting together are very attractive. One of the things besides compensation is actually having a seat at the table. So it's really turned into a great transition for people to make from legal to compliance. So this is part of our GC Advantage program. We do this on a monthly basis. We have our great advisors who are highly respected in industry. They've all served in the seats, and they do us the great pleasure or a great fortune of inviting some of the talent that they know in industry to join us. And we're really appreciative of the general counsel and chief compliance officers that join us. Actually, next meeting we have next month, June 14th. General counsel's role in private company growth at each stage of development, and Jamie Seeley being our advisor, and having Jason Lynch, general counsel of the Foundry Group venture capital organization, join us. So it's going to be really attractive. That's another area that we've seen a lot of demand. Private equity or venture capital firms looking for us to help them either build their own organization or build their portfolio companies. So it's really turned into a really great career as these portcos move on to either IPO or get bought out. And I've watched plenty of general counsel become extremely successful. So look forward to that program next month. Questions and answers. We're happy to answer questions throughout the meeting today. So feel free to just scroll down, ask a question. If it's something we can get to in real time, we will. Otherwise, we're going to leave a few minutes at the end to answer some questions. And then feel free, if we don't answer questions because there's too many, feel free to reach out to any of us individually. And today, as I mentioned, we have Haydee Olinger, who happens to be our senior advisor, former chief compliance officer for McDonald's. Haydee, I have a funny story to tell you that I've never told you before. We're optimizing our website right now. So we have a company doing research, what terms get searched the most. And believe it or not, your name is on the top of the list, is what gets searched the most. So we're extremely proud and happy to have you with us. And Haydee today has a special guest, Stephanie Lambert, joining us. And Stephanie, thank you so much for your input today. So all that said, welcome, Haydee. I'll pass the torch to you and let you run with this program.
Thank you, John. What a nice compliment to hear that. As you know, as John said, my name is Haydee Olinger. I am the former Global Chief Compliance Officer at McDonald's. I'm currently an advisor, as he said, with BarkerGilmore, where I provide executive coaching and I assist companies in assessing, enhancing, or structuring their compliance program. In addition, I currently sit on 2 public boards listed on the NETSCOUT and am on the board of trustees for DePaul University in Chicago. I am so thrilled to have Stephanie join me in the presentation today. She has a different perspective than mine, which is wonderful. At the same time, of course, chief compliance officers, we talk the same language, but the fact that she has recently joined the ranks of compliance officer a couple of years back is really important to today's presentation, because she has the firsthand experience of transitioning into that role. So Stephanie, would you like to tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Haydee, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here, excited to talk about my transition. It has been a good one. So if folks are wondering what this is all about, the role that I'm in has fulfilled my expectations and more. I was actually in a layoff situation and considering my next move about 3 or so years ago. And I happen to know the general counsel at my current company, NETSCOUT Systems, which is right outside of Boston. And we talked about this position, and I thought this was a great opportunity for me to expand my skill set, always looking to grow. I'm very curious about learning new areas, new companies, new industries, and this role seemed perfect for that. It also is a role that brought me closer to the board. And, that's sort of the thing that makes you more GC ready if you're thinking about that top position. And I think this particular company was of interest to me because it's a cybersecurity, and there was an opportunity really to grow the compliance function. So all those things taking into account, I made the move just before the pandemic. So I was fortunate to move from that layoff to a role that I've now enjoyed since then.
Thank you, Stephanie. We chose this topic because the need to establish an effective compliance program that is backed by a workplace that has a culture that prioritizes integrity is extremely important this day in businesses. In February of this year, BarkerGilmore interviewed 25 chief compliance officers in various industries to learn about the challenges that facing chief compliance officers in 2023. And they highlighted 3 trends contributing to the expansion of the role: ESG, environmental, social, and governance programs, of course, CRM, enterprise risk management, and new work culture, which I will expand upon later in this webinar. Sitting on the 2 public boards I mentioned, these are all definitely topics we talk about in the boardroom. I was also at a meeting last week where a GC of a large corporation mentioned that there's still a demand for compliance team members and chief compliance officers. She specifically mentioned that her company was making it a priority because of increasing legislation, such as the new European Green Deal and Brazil's deforestation initiatives. So the good news is that the role's visibility and importance in the company today has been elevated. So what if you are transitioning into this role? Stephanie and I have both a different perspective on that, because when I was at McDonald's, I was already an employee that transitioned into a compliance role. The difference was that we didn't have a compliance function. So I started the function at McDonald's, but there, you can either be in compliance already and become elevated to the chief compliance officer role, or be outside in the same company, and then join the compliance function, or come into the role as a compliance officer, which is Stephanie's perspective. So if you can go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself, Stephanie.
Sure. So a little bit more detail on what I was doing prior to the compliance role. I was a business attorney, and what that means is I negotiated lots of contracts. I worked on intellectual property. I also did some compliance work at a large company, Staples. And that is an area that I really enjoyed. And it was one that, I did some project management. I worked very closely with the business on compliance initiatives, and I had a leadership role. So I think all of those things combined made this an easier or natural step for me to move sort of sideways. And initially, my role was as a compliance counsel, and I was promoted to compliance officer since arriving here. So I think, those skill sets, and we'll talk more about those in a little bit, are what enabled me to make that transition smoother.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. So you come into a new role, and the first thing is understanding the history of compliance in the company. I had no history of compliance at McDonald's from a formalized standpoint. But for those who come in new to the role, if you're coming from outside into a company, you should really try to understand how that function has been perceived in the organization. Has it been a policing function? You want to know what you're getting into, right? When you come into this new position, has management been supportive of the chief compliance officer in the function? And what has been the communication about compliance? When you first get into this role, understanding all of those nuances are quite important, because they're going to determine how people view your function. And if it has always been a function that people are talk about behind everyone's back as something they have to do, then you're going to have some work ahead of you. But if it's a function that hasn't been embraced, and not because there's a compliance monitor, but truly embraced by your management because they truly believe in ethical conduct within an organization, then you'll have an easier time of transitioning. Similarly, Stephanie, what was your experience?
Yeah, so I certainly interviewed with the leadership. So my role reports to the general counsel. Most compliance roles tend to do that. And there's always sort of, we won't get into that, but the dynamic of being an attorney and then doing a compliance job. But I report to the general counsel. So obviously I interviewed with him, but I did interview with both the CEO and the chief operating officer. And it was important to me that I understand from them that they supported the role. They acknowledged that there are challenges in the job, but it was clear to me that I had a direct line, even though I was reporting to the general counsel. So I think it's important to find that out ahead of time and before you take that step and transition into that type of position. Obviously, if you're with the company, you know what exists, but if you're moving into a new company, you'd want to explore that.
In addition, not everyone's made out, it's cut out to be a compliance officer. The role itself has its challenges. You're no longer a part of the everyday business management process or assistance, as Stephanie was saying. You're now in a different, you're kind of siloed, but part of your role as a new compliance officer is to break down those silos. That's why understanding your skill set when you come in to this role is very important. John mentioned that a lot of times people are looking for lawyers in this position, but I don't think it necessarily has to be one. I think it is. It's something that has developed, but compliance officers can certainly be from a communications background, from an accounting background, or other areas that support the compliance function. So understanding your skill set. So what do you bring to this role? Is this something where you feel you're going to be challenged? If you're a risk manager, for example, or you have expertise in risk management, this is certainly an area, because one of the biggest things a compliance officer has to do is understand the risks in the organization. If you're a corporate strategist, this is also an exciting area, because corporate strategy has to be a part of your compliance function at some level. Technology, if you enjoy technology, again, the changing needs of the organizations due to people working from home, due to the globalization of companies, technology is extremely important. And should be able to understand how compliance can be integrated into the business. When you first come in, that's one of the first observations you should make. Has compliance been integrated into the business? I'm finding that a lot of times it's still a work in progress with my clients, because they just don't have the resources to move beyond what they can do with the limited dollars they have today. And so, in addition to that, I know that there are other skills that I think Stephanie would like to talk about.
Sure. So I think, starting with the substantive skills, this type of, or substantive knowledge, this type of a role does cover some fairly substantive large areas. It runs the gamut, depending on the company, but let's say base ones would be like data privacy. If you're international, anti-bribery, international trade, potentially competition law, HR, and then you're running investigations for the company. So you want to have some basis in those, and then an interest to learn more, I think, a curiosity, because there is a lot. As Haydee mentioned, it's a constantly growing and evolving area. But then the key ones that I mentioned earlier, the soft skills, like the influencing skills, how do you typically work with your business counterparts? It's more challenging as a compliance professional to get their attention than it is if you're working with them on a deal that's benefiting the bottom line. So I think that those skills coupled with project management skills, and that was an area that I developed prior to coming here that I found really useful in my work. And it is definitely a big part of compliance. So those would be the ones that you enjoy those types of things, you will enjoy doing the work of a compliance officer.
Yes, thank you. We just have one quick question before I move on to the next topic. Curious if you've seen some professionals who are both chief compliance officers and also have other legal business responsibilities. Interesting, you should ask that. As it turns out, I just recently worked with a client through BarkerGilmore who had chief compliance officer title and chief litigation officer. Now, both of them were full-time jobs with limited resources. So, I mean, it was overwhelming for my client to have both areas, but it can happen, I suppose, in companies where they just don't, they're trying to take advantage or use the number of employees they have in the market right now. And people are there's a lot of layoffs. There's a lot of there's downsizing going on. And in companies where they can't afford to have two people in the role, it becomes difficult. But then, you might question, well, I hope this guy's getting compensated for this, or this gal's getting compensated for this extra work. And we can talk about that ad nauseum as well. But again, it is in demand, which is why even though he was the litigation head, he was moved into this role. So I guess it is possible. I don't encourage it. I think full compliance is a full-time job. So you're in there now. And one of the, you're going to hear this from me over and over, because corporate culture and the values of the company are so critical. And I know all of you who are on listening to us today know that about your companies. And where things are not successful, or the program is not successful, is in companies where the corporate culture or the values are just window dressing. I mean, or the values are window dressing. They have them up there, but people don't follow them. One of the first things you should do as you transition into the role is really assess that corporate culture, assess where the values are in the company, assess whether they really even mean anything. Can employees reiterate the company values? And are decisions being made and put through the values lens? The most difficult thing a compliance officer will have to do is try and adjust that culture, or work with management to form the culture. Certainly your top management has to start it, but if you're coming in as a new compliance officer and you see there's a break somewhere, that has to be one of the top priorities, because everything flows from there. Don't you think so, Stephanie?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I agree with you. And I think once you are in the role and you have more visibility, you can see how is this tone from the top, that the values, how is it getting communicated? And I think one of the opportunities that I identified was for the compliance team to communicate these values in and of themselves. So not simply relying on HR or others to do it, but to also be that voice. And I created a communication strategy for the team in terms of, getting out there on the various communication channels available at the company, commenting on different topics and different telling stories in the news or what have you that communicate, always doing the right thing and that tone from the top. So there's opportunity to do more there, I think, as resources allow.
Oh, I agree. And then when you first come in anyway, I mean, another thing you have to do is certainly, look at that budget and understand your resources. Many of my clients don't have large budgets, and that's because there has been a lot of cost cutting, potential recession, all of those things that are happening right now in the business. Obviously, something's got to give, and most departments are giving. And unfortunately, I think compliance may be giving more than others. But when you don't have those resources and you first come in, the first thing you want to do is look at that budget and see where it's being spent currently. And then determine, is the team actually optimizing those dollars? And what can they eliminate that they're doing today that isn't really having the BAM effect, or that effect that you need in order to ensure that the compliance function is effective? And where are the top risks, and how do you allocate that? And you have to leverage others in the organization to assist you with your compliance function. When I first started the compliance function at McDonald's, I didn't have a lot of dollars. So I worked with my in-house counsel outside at different markets throughout the world to be my compliance liaisons. And while they had to do it as part of their, they had a full-time job. It was very nice that I already knew a lot of them and could ask them to do me this favor. But in addition to that, I leveraged some of the people in audit and some of the people in the accounting team who were also, who enjoyed the compliance area and wanted to contribute and help with it. So again, when you don't have enough resources, you should be looking at what you can do with what you have. Anything else on that, Stephanie, or,
No, I think you covered that, Haydee.
Okay. So as you become a new chief compliance officer, you also have to start changing your focus. What would you say on that, Stephanie?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I came here at the start of the pandemic, and soon thereafter, there were a lot of questions from leaders in the company about, well, Stephanie, what's next? What are the next issues? What do we need? What aren't we prepared for? What's the next thing that is out there? And I find that there's an expectation that somehow I can predict the future. If you've done any kind of reading on this topic, they talk about risks in sort of 4 categories: the unknown unknowns, the unknown knowns, and it just kind of goes on from there. And well, I'm not certain that I can tell you what the next unknown unknown is. And what I've learned is that the best thing for us to do for the business is to stay aware of what's coming. And we initiated in our company a trend analysis, right? So if you can see what the trends are, then perhaps you can put in place and anticipate what the next thing is coming down the pike. That's one area that we've tried to focus some attention on. And the other is on reaction, right? The sooner you can address an issue, the more likely you are to mitigate its impact. And doing some sorts of tabletop exercises on different topics, running how would we respond on this or that across functions has also been a way to try to get at those things. So it's moved from let's develop training and policies to these more strategic opportunities to anticipate the next issue. And I think that's the result of what we saw from the pandemic.
Exactly. And that's why when you talk about, what's the future going to hold, and how can the chief compliance officer be that predictor? There are some beginning signs, I think, for compliance officers to think about, this whole the hybrid model of work, the remote work has its own lists of issues that the compliance officer has to be concerned about. In addition to that, you want to be able to touch all of these people who aren't necessarily in the office every day. Another topic which I've been reading a lot about, and I know is a focus of many organizations, is this mental health awareness. And if there's a way that the chief compliance officer can partner with HR or other people in the organization to focus on this very important issue. I just read an article this morning in the Chicago Tribune. I think his name is Jake Berger. He is an infielder with the Chicago White Sox, and he has spoken out about his mental health issues, a lot of it having to do with anxiety to perform playing baseball. So imagine, I mean, he's in the limelight. He's got a career that is public, and he's feeling all the things that all of us can feel. So mental health awareness in an organization is something you should be looking at. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not going to go away. We talk about this in our boardroom. I know that a lot of companies are doing that as well. So think about a way that you can partner to help HR and everyone else in the company focus on those very important issues. Work-life balance goes along with mental health awareness, and focusing on that. And certainly the newest one that I keep reading a lot about is this AI, the technology trends, and how artificial intelligence is going to affect employees in the future, how that's going to change the role, maybe even change the role of compliance. So thinking about all those future focused new trends are important. So changing the focus, as you know, your change in focus is different today than it was when I was Chief Compliance Officer and starting out. And so I think be prepared to create proactive strategies to support corporate culture. And I think you have some comments on that, Stephanie.
Sure. Yeah. So I think your point about the technological trends, other things is, you know, when you read about risk, they'll call that a disruptive risk, or what are the disruptors? Like the pandemic essentially was a bit of a disruptor in certain industries. And we're looking closely at ChatGPT, for example, that how is that potentially going to disrupt the way we do business? And so moving to your next question on, you know, proactive strategies and around corporate culture and how we mitigate risks, I also wear another hat in the organization, and that is overseeing enterprise risk management. Clearly, you know, the two work hand in hand, compliance and risk management. And I mentioned that I came in to mature the function. There was a really good running compliance program here, enterprise risk management program. So I looked at some industry benchmarking and found ways that we could then grow it to the next level to try to break down more silos. I mentioned a few of the strategies already that I implemented. One was a communication plan, getting my folks out, talking to other people, posting, commenting on topics of the day, doing the trend analysis. Another area is on cognitive bias. We did some training on that, and that goes to decision making. Are you making a decision because your company, for instance, has never had that issue? Well, just because you've never had it doesn't mean you won't in the future. Those are the cognitive bias that may come into corporate decision making, or leaders who've been in a role for a very long time may have a bias in how things have always been a certain way. We're also changing our executive training so that executives are not doing the same training that everyone else is. We're doing in-person training this year, and that's another way to try to get at the risk. We're also creating crisis response teams. So all of these have come out of the work that has been done in our enterprise risk management program. And these are strategies that we've been implementing beyond the trainings and beyond policy drafting to try to get at those future potential risks.
I think that's, I mean, I'm glad I'm checking. I was on mute. I was unmuted. I'm unmuted. Anyway, you know, I do appreciate those comments as well, Stephanie, because all of those proactive strategies are so critical as you transition into the Chief Compliance Officer role. And when we start talking about the first 90 days and securing early wins, again, coming up with those new different ideas are going to be important. You also, I mean, of course, we need to focus on legal regulations, but there are a lot of policies in an organization that aren't necessarily legal in nature, such as, you know, the conflicts of interest, gifts and business entertainment. Those are policies that I think are indicative of, you know, what the company stands for, and some of the beyond legal issues that compliance officers have to deal with. So let's move on to the next slide. So now you're in the job and you have your first 90 days. When I'm talking to some of my clients, I talk to them about securing early wins. So what does that mean? It's almost the opposite of just avoiding early losses. And some of those common traps are, first of all, in your first 90 days, failing to focus, identify those low-hanging fruit and focus on making that a win. As I mentioned earlier, look to see where you can have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time, especially at the beginning. Another trap is really not taking the business situation into account. If the business is currently struggling in some form or another, or there's been some recent reduction in force, this isn't the time for you to be asking for certain resources. You have to work with what you have, with the full understanding that as things turn around, you can then come back and ask for those important things. Another common trap is not adjusting to the culture. And again, I know I keep talking about culture, but it is so critical. And you, as a new compliance officer, have to start getting a feel for what the company's about. And you should certainly be talking to other members of management, to your CEO, to other employees, and just getting a feel for, what is the culture? Sit back and listen. Talk to people and listen. That's the most critical thing, I think, also in the first 90 days. And certainly in the beginning, failing to get wins that matter to your boss. What problems does your boss care about? And understanding and going and working towards closing whatever gaps he or she has in an area may be of much benefit to you. Stephanie, did you want to comment on that as well?
Sure. So I think I completely agree. I think I would label that like a listening tour, right? There's an opportunity to go out, show that you're open to getting feedback. One of the questions I always ask would be, well, what are some of the pain points, right? So, you, Mr. Business or Mrs. Business Person, where are you having some challenges? What are your stumbling blocks? And then thinking through as a compliance officer, whether there's anything that you can do to help that person with those issues. One example could be, on intake, for instance, when we bring in a vendor or a third party, we're asking all kinds of questions of those folks. Is there an opportunity to be less conservative? Are we being too conservative? Is there an opportunity to be more efficient and effective? I think that's an area that you can find some early wins potentially if things have been are too cumbersome or clunky in the process. And I would add that to your list of things to check in on early on, because that helps with your credibility, showing your flexibility, and that you're willing to listen and make change.
Thank you, Stephanie. In fact, that answers one of the questions here. Can you please share examples of early wins you've experienced? Another question, interested in thoughts, perspective regarding right-sizing compliance teams and how teams can best demonstrate value and critically absent enforcement actions, penalties, et cetera, which often cause reactionary hiring. How many people do you have on your team, Stephanie?
Well, that's interesting. I currently have 3 people reporting to me. We're a company of about $1 billion. We're B2B. So you do have to put it into context in terms of the type of business that you are. When I got here, there was only 1 person. So I have doubled the team, which has enabled me to create, I'm a big believer in asking people and assigning ownership to certain areas, right? So if you're able to get to that point where you can have folks own certain areas, it creates accountability. Everyone knows who the go-to is. It creates efficiencies and it creates expertise as well. I also think, you have to think, if you don't have that level of resource internally in terms of employee count and head count, what are your external experts, right? So talk a little bit about how much of outside expertise you need. Are you comfortable with who the company has? Do they have anyone lined up for those really higher risk areas? And then thinking through, are there folks that you can then, I have some folks with dotted line to me who have other responsibilities, but they have a certain expertise, like for instance, on export laws. Don't directly report to me, but they handle those things and they're sort of a part of the extended compliance team. So you have to be creative and flexible and try to grab onto those people who may have an interest or interested in trying compliance or learning a little bit more about it. and they're willing to do some things as part of the compliance program.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. That's what we were talking about earlier as well. That one of the important things is leveraging though others in the company who have a passion for it or who enjoy this type of work. Another one is, what compliance group of conferences or designees would you recommend? Yes, SEC is a good one. Stephanie, I think you're part of some additional ones, some additional
Yes, so, well, I'm an active member of the Association of Corporate Counsel, which does have one of their biggest networks is compliance and ethics. And we've also joined the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics. I have a member on my team who has some compliance certifications. So that's another thing to be thinking about. We haven't talked about the defensive posture of compliance, but I found that when in hiring, that was a very attractive option. So if you're looking to move into a compliance role, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, SCCE, they do some certifications, and that I think can offer some credentials. And it certainly offered and helped credential my program further to have someone with those.
Yeah, exactly. So, going on as you're focused in your first 90 days, one of the next very important things is to build credibility. And how do people build credibility? It doesn't just have to be a chief compliance officer. It could be anyone who is moving into a new leadership role. Certainly, those who are more successful are those who can be demanding, but be able to be satisfied. Normally effective leaders press people to make realistic commitments, then hold them to their promises. Accessible, but not too familiar. This means being approachable, but in a way that preserves your authority. Be decisive, but judicious. Early in your transition, you want to project decisiveness, but defer important decisions until you know enough to make them. Focused, but flexible. Zero in on issues but consult others and encourage input. And finally, active without causing commotion. Make things happen, but avoid pushing people to the point of burnout. And that's very critical as well, as I talked earlier about mental health. What else would you say, Stephanie?
Well, I've mentioned two. One was the listening tour and gathering input. I would say one of the things, and this also goes to early wins, but I built some credibility with the CEO and the COO early on when I had a matter that we were investigating, and I gave them options in terms of what the company could do. So what I have found typically in the way that I approached the advising is unless it's something of serious significance where there's only one option. But where there are options, I try to lay them out from, here's a more conservative approach, or it's reasonable for a company of our size or what have you to do X, Y, and Z, or it's another option is simply to do nothing, but this is potentially the ramifications. So I got feedback that they really appreciated providing them with a bunch of options on this particular issue. And I think the more you can do that, particularly with things that are of lower risk, the more you'll build credibility. So then when you go in and you say, well, quite frankly, we have only one option, they're going to believe you, right? So that's what we're talking about, credibility. The sky isn't always falling. You really have to look at the risks and measure them and calculate them and share your recommendations. They're the decision makers. And then know when you have to, call the big one and tell them that there's really no choice to do this onerous, difficult thing. But by that point, you'll have earned their credibility.
And by doing that, Stephanie, you're actually now building a productive relationship with them and with those leaders that your boss also respects and appreciates, that they view you as someone who can be a partner to the top management team. So building relationships is important, as I think everybody knows that. I mean, lawyers always know that that's a good thing. One of the most important things about coming in as a new compliance officer is getting to know those key corporate leaders. Invite them to lunch, call them into a meeting, have coffee with them, do something so that you can at least start to understand how they feel about compliance, how they feel about you coming in. What are the things they're looking for from you as a new leader in this area that perhaps they haven't seen in other leaders? A few things you certainly shouldn't do is trash the past. I mean, if you're first in there and you start seeing some things that didn't look like it was the right way things should have been done, or you would have done things differently, I wouldn't point that out. Don't stay away from your boss. Get on your boss's calendar regularly, especially early on. Be sure your boss is aware of the issues you face early on, but also be aware of their expectations. And don't ever surprise your boss, obviously. And if you're talking to other individuals, don't approach them only with problems. As Stephanie said, she came up with some creative ways. She gave them options and the ability to build relationships where people don't feel like you're going to come in and tell them there's only one way to do things. That's going to go a long way to building the respect and the and elevate the department and you within the organization. Be a student of the business has always been a big deal with me. As I talk to my clients when we're talking about how they want to grow in the organization or what's been holding them back from becoming a compliance officer or from moving on to a GC role, if that's what they want. The most important thing that I find they're lacking is being a student of the business, really understanding the corporation's strategies and the risks. So when you're in there, the first 90 days, you need to understand what those are, because those strategies can very well be impacted by what you do as a compliance officer. If they have a particular strategy and you're trying to move things the wrong way, that's not going to bode well. Read the company's filings, learn how to read the company's P&L early on, and understand how the company makes money. All of that will allow you to speak their speak, understand what they're interested in. And that's how you can contribute to conversations beyond just that compliance officer speech that you might want to give or talking about compliance. You really don't want to be pigeonholed, especially if you have other aspirations. If you're pigeonholed as just a compliance officer, they won't look at you beyond that role in the organization. So it's always good to widen your net. Isn't that what you've done as well, Stephanie?
Yes, I have. So I think you're correct. And, businesses can be complex, and I feel like I'm still learning. Certainly the pandemic made it a little bit of a slower start, but it would be very challenging to put together a risk assessment for this compliance program if I did not know the business strategies, right? So let's say, I'll just give you an example. If I didn't know that we typically sell in certain areas through third parties, I would not be aware that that's a potential, bigger risk for the company. Is obviously you don't control them. You have contractual commitments, but you don't have that control. So you need to understand, how do they deal with customers? Where are the customers? How does the product, if it's a product business, how does it move? Is it coming from certain countries? Are there limits in terms of sourcing? Those are the questions that you need answered so that you can conduct a valuable and accurate risk assessment. And as we said earlier, you have limited resources and you need to be putting them where the risks are, and it stems from learning the business, as Haydee described.
Thank you. We have a number of questions coming in. Stephanie, you mentioned conflicts of interest disclosures for associates. Would you recommend the same for contractors as part of an onboarding? It depends. It depends on how many contractors you have. It depends on whether the business people are willing to help you and work through that. As a compliance officer, it's not always easy to just go to a contractor and say, I'm the compliance officer. You really need that business liaison individual in the company to work with you. Of course, it's always good to have a conflict of interest, from various vendors, but that's something you'd have to work with your business people and see how they feel about putting that as part of their onboarding process for new vendors. Anything else on that, Stephanie? Or
No, I think.
okay. Okay, here's another one. How are the lines typically drawn between compliance and legal? There can be a bit of overlap. So how are these responsibilities typically distinguished and divided? How are you doing that, Stephanie?
Well, it is overlap. So it's not, there is no bright line, in my opinion. It's a gray area. I think we work on that every single day in terms of, the privilege and with the legal hat on versus the compliance piece. So I guess I don't really have a great answer for you. I do know that it is that specific question is one that is focused on a lot in legal commentary, but yet no changes are made to 60% or more of compliance officers report to the general counsel. Efficiency for a number of reasons. I think you just really need to be conscious of what you're doing. What is it that you're working on? How, what's the nature of it? How significant is it to the company? And then, making sure you're putting in whatever protections you think you need. But, it's a constant conversation, I would say.
And, in conjunction with what you just said, and there's a question here about what's the overlap between ERM and compliance. And I think you're a wonderful example of how you are also in charge of ERM. But the same goes for the question on what extent is the compliance involved in ESG disclosures. I remember when I was at McDonald, I was involved in those disclosures. I did have to certify to those. And I think you said you had also at where you're working at now, correct, Stephanie?
I don't certify them. Actually, the general counsel is our ESG officer. So you want to talk about, really marrying the functions. I get involved in certain aspects of it, as do some of my other colleagues. I do look at risk factors in our filings to make sure that nothing has been overlooked as part of, that's my ERM hat really, and making sure it lines up with what we've been talking about as part of that program.
So part of your ERM though, are you conducting the risk assessments for the organization? That's another question here. Does compliance do it, internal audit, or or all of the above? How does that work?
It may be all of the above. There's also, obviously, typically you don't want business owners responsible necessarily for compliance, but they do implement and they are on the front line. So it is a partnership. And I think that it depends is the answer. You can think of certain areas where legal is driving or doing, or compliance, I should say, is doing more of the day-to-day, like for instance, on any bribery, we're doing more of the advising and more of the auditing and monitoring of that. So I think it does depend. I mean, I work very closely with the CISO and on data privacy and on cybersecurity. So that's a real partnership. So I think you can't peanut butter spread it. You have to, again, it's all about assessing the individual risk and what makes sense for that particular risk. In some cases, I have a panel, like 3 or 4 people who are, on the hit list for a particular risk, and they're supposed to be assessing them. We do some assessments ourselves. We do auditing and the monitoring function. If that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. One of the things when you're talking about how does your program fit into the company's overall strategies, if you were to read a number of companies' public filings, you'll see that many of them are still listing the pandemic as a continuing risk. So one of the ways that a compliance officer can perhaps start getting ahead of that is look, does your compliance program include a strategy related to this ongoing risk? In other words, how are you rethinking your training program? Remember, out of sight, out of mind. So what are you doing to rethinking the way you're delivering the message? And how are you going to help management craft compliance messages for Zoom and Teams, which is, again, it's a continuing risk that the organizations are going through. So what are you going to do to help them? And the other one is remote workers. That's a critical one as the organizations continue to grapple with this pandemic aftermath. And one of the other things I would recommend for you is to ask HR to add ethics-related questions to their interview process. For example, they may say something like, well, tell me about a time when you were challenged ethically. I don't think enough HR people focus on that. I think it would be helpful if a compliance officer could talk to them about that, adding some questions like that, which I think will give you a good insight. And by the way, a lot of the new workforce employees are interested in working for companies that have ethics as one of the top priorities in the organization. And asking that question will alleviate their concern if that's what they're worried about. But number two, gets an understanding for you as a hiring manager or as a hiring entity about the type of individual you're bringing on board. On the DOJ mandate, did you have any comments on that?
Yes. So, as much as we want to make sure that we're not running a quote unquote paper program only on paper, the paper still is important. And if we're not going to go into the details of the DOJ mandate, but suffice it to say that if you go to their website, you can find a lot of commentary about, and certainly the guidance from them on what a compliance program should look like. And so you need to have that defined. You need to have documentation that shows how you're managing and what you're managing and who's managing it and how it rolls up. And you need to maintain that and refresh it in a reasonable period of time. And we even have a calendar where we show what we're doing at different times of the year from a very high level. And then there are plans below that. So you need to have the documentation, have it accessible, so that future compliance officers, if you're not there one day, you've got that type of documentation for the company. And that, for me, is where the defensive posture that you may need one day for the company will come into play.
We have a question here that I love this question. Data is important when it comes to building and growing a compliance program. However, who is truly a peer for benchmarking and what data are persuasive is very anecdotal. What do you find are the best sources of benchmarking data for management presentations on compliance? Have you had to do anything like that?
Yes. In fact, I recently did that. So we have a whistleblower, obviously, because hotline, because we're public, and we're also the EU has a whistleblower. And we use a service. So one of the sources is this service. I give them a little plug, but it's called NAVEX. And NAVEX does a benchmarking report. And I analyze that and benchmark my whistleblower. We also include inquiries. So you would aggregate your inquiries and the reports that you get, whether through the hotline or outside the hotline. And I analyze that year over year, to look at trends, to look at anything we might want to focus our attention on, and report that up to the executives and report that up to the audit committee. And interestingly, the external auditors have also been interested in that, our reporting on that. So it's getting some attention outside of just your legal circles. It's like, this is really where problems bubble up, and you want to make sure that you're paying attention to them, and the benchmarking can help you interpret that data.
Thank you. The next slide, we pretty much have covered all of those things. Again, assess your hotline program, understand what the volume, but frankly, as exiting the chief compliance role is something that you have to think long and hard about. And as I coach my clients, I say to them, what are your aspirations? Is this where you want to be? Are you good at this job? Is it something that you enjoy doing? If you're not happy with the role you're in, or you're not happy with the company you're at, maybe it's time to move on. People are moving from job to job these days. There's those quiet quitting, all those acronyms and things people are talking about. So it's really up to you to decide, am I still excited about this role? Do I feel that I'm making a difference? Is management committed to compliance and ethics? Do I need to quit this job? Are they not giving me the resources? Is the company not implementing the programs and the recommendations that I have? All of that is going to determine whether you should you should leave. It also, again, as I said, what is your aspiration? If you want to do something else, are you already positioning yourself? Many of my clients are so busy doing their day-to-day job that they forget to focus on their career and what they really want. And then they find themselves 2 years later saying, oh gosh, I wish I could do this, but you're not positioned for that role. Any other comments, Stephanie, before we close? Because I want to be cognizant and respectful of everyone's time.
Sure. So I think, I mean, obviously I haven't left the compliance officer role. Right now, I'm not looking to do that, but I think at the end of the day, you just have to ask yourself, why did you take the role? And I mentioned that at the outset, why I decided to take it. Are you having an impact? And then rethink the things that you're doing. Are there different ways to be doing these things that perhaps can get impact? And raising those concerns to the right people. I would hesitate to leave if I hadn't raised those concerns, because if the compliance officer isn't doing it, then who is? If you don't feel comfortable, then no one else will. So you have to take that risk and put yourself out there and raise the concerns that you have before, I think, before leaving.
Thank you, Stephanie. There's one question here. Can you share a sample compliance report you would submit to the board? If the individual would like to send me an email, I'm happy to share that, something I've used and helped my clients with. And yes, we'll make the slides available, I believe. So at this point, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to spend with us. I know the function is going through a change. I think it's a very positive change. I feel like the compliance function has definitely come to the level where today it's very important. And as I tell you, we talk about it in the boardrooms where I'm at. And so I'll turn it over to John Gilmore. And thank you, Stephanie, again, for your wonderful comments.
For sure. Stephanie, I never would guess that you've been a CCO for only 3 years. You sound like you've been doing it your whole career. So really amazing how quickly you came up to speed. Some of the things you were talking about is ability to influence and communication skills. I love getting more certification the better. Your interaction with privacy, everybody's looking for CCOs to have interaction with privacy. And both of you mentioned over and over again, culture. And one of the things I love to recommend anyone do is when they're on an interview, ask can you share with me what your culture is like and what type of person would be successful in this organization. And then, as you said, Haydee, listen to what they're saying and determine if it's the right for you and play back how you would fit in that. So I guess in closing, I'll just say if anyone out there is looking for a CCO or a general counsel or in-house counsel, a strategic hire GCs would make, or if you're looking for a role yourself, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to keep people informed of these opportunities. And look for us next month. Again, we have a great lineup in June, and I think everyone's going to benefit from it. So thank you again, Stephanie. Really amazing. And Haydee, of course, you're the pro.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.